As someone who, well, I wouldn't say grew up on Halo, but it was a formative game for me in any case, I was excited for the first Destiny, and while the game certainly has a lot of problems, I honestly enjoyed it a lot. I found that while a lot of people complained about the uneven loot system, the poor storytelling, and the repetitive events and patrol missions, a lot of people, often those same people, played the game for hours on end because of its adventurous, colorful aesthetic, its excellent use of atmosphere, and the complex and epic endgame challenges, and most of all, the basic shooter mechanics that just flow smooth as butter. I was one of those people. You may even remember in the early days of the show that I did an episode on the Lovecraftian elements of Destiny's world, backstory, and atmosphere, so yeah, I enjoyed the game a good deal. All this to say, I was excited for Destiny 2. Bungie proved with the first game that they were very open to feedback and absolutely capable of fixing problems when they came up. And by the release of The Taken King, Destiny had turned into something I really do see as a pretty solid MMO FPS. So I'm happy to say that Destiny 2 successfully builds on the foundations that Destiny set and the improvements that The Taken King introduced. It's not perfect, and with these kinds of games, time will tell what elements hold up, which will age poorly, and whether the enjoyment we're having with it now really holds up over time. But as far as I can tell at this point, Destiny 2 has taken most of what made the first game great and made exactly the kinds of changes we all wanted them to make. For the most part. The game begins with a powerful Cabal force destroying the tower and blocking the Traveler's light, which takes away the Guardians' powers and weakens their ghosts so they can't resurrect. For all intents and purposes, the Guardians, including you, are no longer immortal or superhuman in any way. This is a really interesting premise for a game like this, and the whole sequence in which this happens and the following experience of wandering away from the last city, weakened and vulnerable, is something that worked really well for me. Especially as someone who spent a good deal of time and energy on the last game and got pretty connected to its setting. I could really feel the loss, and I felt the urgency in trying to get everything back together as the story progressed. Unfortunately, this loss of power doesn't last long, and while I don't want to spoil how the story goes, I think the way this happens is far and away the weakest narrative point of the story. I'll actually be doing a video talking about it in more detail soon, so look out for that if you want the more spoilery details. But the good news is that while that element of the story is a serious problem for me, the rest of the game's storytelling is vastly improved from the first. It's still not an incredible story, but it's a lot of fun and, you know, coherent. The first game had mission after mission of little objectives that had little visible impact on the story. Each individual mission would exist for one tiny step in accomplishing something more meaningful, and it was honestly kind of hard to track even how each of those little steps contributed to that meaningful conclusion, and as a result, the story was only memorable in the broadest of strokes. All the details were lost in the mire of poorly written fetch quests and filler. At least that was the case for the details that were actually there, instead of waiting in the official app instead of the game for some godforsaken reason. None of that is a problem in Destiny 2. The story has direction, it has drive, and it has a set of memorable goals that push toward the conclusion. I mean, that's basic storytelling stuff, hardly praiseworthy, but it's a huge improvement over the first game, and honestly even most shooters I play nowadays. The best element of the game on a narrative level is the way it characterizes the three vanguards. Zavala, Ikora, and Cayde 6 were, like most characters in the first game, rather interesting people if you looked into them outside of the game itself, but only in later expansions did they come across as anything more than sources for information dumps and voices telling you what to do. Destiny 2, on the other hand, makes a good chunk of the story about finding them, seeing how they're dealing with their newfound mortality, and bringing them together for a big push against the Cabal. And seeing the three of them interact and express their own struggles and doubts is far more compelling than anything that happened in the original game. That's not the only good point about the story. There are plenty of interesting new characters, the best of which is definitely the AI, Failsafe, who seems to have two distinct personalities that both have a rather dark sense of humor. The villain is not super deep, but at least kind of interesting. I mean, the big bad in the first Destiny was literally some weird thing that we didn't know existed until we showed up and fought it, so it's a huge improvement over that. And his motivations actually give us some real interesting insight into the way that humanity and these other creatures look at the Traveler and perceive its nature. The game also still has the same superb sense of atmosphere that hints at far more than you could ever hope to understand about the Destiny universe. Bungie's always been good at that last part. But ultimately, Destiny 2's story isn't anything incredible, but it's serviceable, a big improvement over the first one, and it's a lot of fun. The gameplay... You know, this is the weird part. I'm not sure how much there is to say about it that I couldn't also say about the first game. The base mechanics of Destiny were incredible, and they were never the problem, but the changes made are almost entirely positive. Rather than having specific types of weapons assigned to your primary and secondary slots, Destiny 2 lets you equip a kinetic weapon and an energy weapon. The former is just good old bullets, and the latter does one of 3 types of elemental damage. But the type of weapon, like auto rifles, scout rifles, hand cannons, etc., isn't restricted to either one. So how you approach your loadout is actually a lot more flexible now than it was before. My only complaint here is that power weapons are still restricted, and now include weapons like sniper rifles and shotguns. This makes a degree of sense for the PvP, which we'll talk about in a minute, but it really just kind of cripples the player's ability to form a long or close range playstyle. I was usually very far away from the action in Destiny, and I loved it, but there's just not enough sniper rifle ammo anymore to make that approach viable now that snipers are power weapons. It's probably just more of a difference than a flaw, but it's a difference that I really haven't enjoyed that much. Repetitive patrols are replaced, well, I mean they still exist, but they barely matter, so their role in the game has basically been replaced with adventures. Full mission-length mini-stories you can find and activate all over the game's play spaces. These are a lot of fun, and they both expand the lore of the area you're in and give you more opportunities to get to know the operators of each area as characters. They're a ton of fun. Public events are also more common and can be tracked from the map, so you're not wandering around waiting for them anymore. There are cool little hidden areas called Lost Sectors that have some real pretty scenery sometimes and give you some cool loot for finding them and taking down a powerful enemy, and some of them are a blast to find and explore. There will even be powerful enemies that just show up sometimes and grant loot when you kill them. There is just a lot more going on in Destiny 2 at any given moment that there was in the first game, so even if you're just exploring, there's rarely a dull moment. The loot system's the same on a basic level, but you'll find yourself getting more stuff and finding it, generally speaking, more useful, at least until you've gotten through most of what the game has to offer and don't have much further to progress. Strikes are also back, and while they're mostly similar to before, there's a greater variety of objectives and more creativity put into the level design. So they're also improved, and really by this point you're no doubt picking up on this pattern. This is Destiny, but better. Its flaws have mostly been addressed, and the result is a taut, enjoyable multiplayer shooter that has retained very few of the frustrations that made the first game a little difficult to enjoy sometimes. The most controversial change here was the decision to make shaders applicable to individual items, so you can change the color scheme of each piece of gear, but it's a consumable, and you can't remove them from items, so you find yourself limited in how you can customize your look by how willing you are to color something that might end up being replaced later on anyway. I haven't had too much problem with this personally, but the system definitely has its up and downs. It's not ideal in any sense. I guess I can't do a review without mentioning the Crucible, too. I was never too big a fan of the Crucible, because honestly, while I enjoy multiplayer competitive shooters, they aren't really my wheelhouse, and I don't understand them on a deep enough level to have much authority here. I can say that I've enjoyed the Crucible a good deal more in this game than I did in the original, but also that, like with the original, it just pales next to all the fun co-op stuff you can do with your friends. It's fine, it's a good addition to the game, but it's not the core of the game, and there's a good reason for that. This is a weird one to review, and honestly, I'm not sure how much substance I've been able to get across here. It really is best understood by describing it in comparison to the previous game's systems and narratives, and most of it comes down to basically like before, but better. So this might be one of the more useless reviews I've done, but the ultimate takeaway is that if you're not into multiplayer shooters, or you're looking for a deeply engaging narrative experience, Destiny 2 is still not really the game for you. But if you enjoyed the first game, or even just saw potential in it but got frustrated with some of its flaws, I think it's more than likely that this one will provide plenty of hours of entertainment with friends. So all in all, in Games is Lit 101, Destiny 2 gets a B+.